Today's story is so forbidden, it feels like the land itself is holding its breath. Set in the American West, where copper sunsets bleed across canyon walls, and the wind carries more than dust. It's a place where love is a risk, where water runs thin, and where one glance can cost an entire people their peace. It began with a single feather lying beside a sacred spring, small enough to overlook, but powerful enough to unravel two worlds. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The afternoon sun hung low, copper red against the jagged rim of the canyon. Loco stood alone at the edge of the small, sacred spring, the one his people had always called the place where water first spoke to the earth. The band had camped here for 3 moons now, hidden in the folds of the Chiricahua foothills, far enough from the soldier trails that the dust of their passing rarely reached this high. He crouched, fingers tracing the damp sand at the spring's lip, reading the faint impressions left by deer hooves and the smaller prints of quail. Routine. Necessary. The land still gave enough to live. Then the wind stopped, not gradually, not with a sigh. It simply ceased. The cottonwood leaves that had been whispering overhead went still as stone. No bird called from the rimrock. No lizard rustled in the dry grass. The silence pressed against his ears like wet wool, thick and wrong. Loco did not rise. He did not breathe louder. He only lifted his gaze, slow, deliberate, scanning the narrow slot of sky above the canyon walls. The spring water lay flat, mirror black under the dying light. Near the far bank, half buried in the silt where the bank had slumped after last month's rain, a single feather rested. White, long, the quill snapped clean. Not eagle, not hawk. Too fine for vulture. A thing that belonged to no bird that hunted these mountains. Beside it, pressed into the mud, the shallow crescent of a boot heel. Leather. Metal shod. White man's mark. He knew the shape. He had seen it before, on trails the soldiers rode when they came looking for cattle they claimed had vanished. But this print was fresh. Yesterday's rain had not yet softened its edges. Someone had stood here, close enough to touch the water that fed the band's horses, the women's cooking pots, the medicine pouches they dipped when fever came. Loco's hand hovered above the feather. He did not pick it up. To touch it now, without ceremony, would be to invite more than curiosity. The old ones had taught that the land remembers what is done to it. Usen, the life-giver, does not speak in thunder when he is displeased. He withdraws the breath from the world until men listen. He straightened, slow as a shadow lengthening. The silence held. No wind stirred the feather. No bird returned. Only the faint, metallic taste of dust on his tongue and the weight in his chest that had not been there when he walked down to the spring. Kael would need to know. The boy who used to follow him like a pup would listen without question, but the others, some of the younger warriors already restless, already whispering that the band stayed too long in one place, would read this differently. A sign. A warning. Proof the land no longer sheltered them fully. Loco could cover the print, scuff it with his moccasin, scatter sand over the feather, walk away as though nothing had spoken. The band would drink tomorrow. The horses would graze. The women would grind mesquite. Life would continue its narrow thread until the next rain or the next soldier patrol found them anyway. Or he could call Kael now, point to the mark, let the word spread quiet through the wiki-ups. Admit the spring had been touched. Admit the band was no longer invisible. admit they might have to move before the moon turned again, before the grass yellowed further, before the water shrank to mud. He looked east, toward the narrow pass where the wagon road cut through the mountains. Far off, faint as smoke, dust rose in a thin line. A coach, maybe. Or soldiers. Or settlers pushing deeper into what little remained theirs. The feather lay untouched. The boot print waited. Loco exhaled once, a sound no louder than the settling of dust. Then he turned back toward the camp, footsteps deliberate, leaving the spring exactly as he had found it. The silence followed him. The rain came hard and sudden, a gray wall sweeping down the Chiricahua slopes like a herd stampeding. The wagon road, little more than 2 ruts gouged into red clay, turned slick and treacherous in minutes. Eliza Hartwell pressed her gloved palm to the fogged glass, watching the world dissolve into streaks of water and shadow. Inside the coach, the air was thick with wet wool, lamp oil, and the faint sourness of fear. Vesper Lang sat rigid opposite her, knuckles white around the edges of her Bible. "We should have waited the storm out in Tucson," she said, voice thin. "This country doesn't forgive mistakes." Eliza did not answer. She had heard the same litany for weeks, since St. Louis, since the train, since the last stage stop, where the driver had muttered about Apache tracks fresh on the trail. The words no longer cut. They simply settled, heavy as the rain on the canvas roof. The coach lurched, wheels sliding, then caught. The driver, Dax Harlan, shouted something lost in the wind. The horses screamed once, high and panicked. Then the motion stopped altogether. Eliza leaned forward. Through the blurred glass, she saw shapes, dark, motionless, rising from the dripping pines on both sides of the road. Riders. Not soldiers. Not settlers. Apache. A dozen, maybe more, cloaked in sodden blankets and hides, rifles across saddles or bows unstrung but ready. They did not shout. They did not brandish weapons. They simply waited, horses planted, rain streaming off their shoulders. Loco sat the paint horse a half-length ahead of the others. Water darkened his hair to black oil, plastered the eagle feathers flat against his temple. He lifted one hand, slow, palm open. Not a threat, only a signal. The band held position. Inside the coach, Vesper's breath caught. "Merciful God," she whispered, fingers flying to the rosary at her throat. "They'll kill us. Scalp us. Worse." Eliza did not move. She could not look away from the man on the paint. His face was carved hard, high cheekbones, a thin scar tracing the left one like a dry riverbed, but the eyes were steady, dark as wet obsidian, fixed on the window where her own face must be a pale blur behind the rain-streaked glass. Something shifted inside her chest. Not terror. Not exactly. A pull, sudden and deep, as though a thread long buried had been tugged taut. She lifted her hand without thinking and pressed it to the cold pain. The leather glove left a faint smear in the condensation. Across the divide of rain and glass, his gaze flicked to the movement. For the space of one heartbeat, the hardness around his mouth eased, just enough to notice. Recognition? Curiosity? Something older, something that had no name in either of their languages. Then he looked away, lifted his chin to the others. A low word, carried on the wind. The riders shifted, opening the road. Passage granted. Dax Harlan snapped the reins. The horses lunged forward, wheels churning mud. The coach rolled on, rocking violently, leaving the riders behind in the downpour. Eliza twisted in the seat, pressing her face to the rear window. Through the gray curtain, she caught one last glimpse. Loco still motionless on the paint, watching until the bend swallowed him. Vesper exhaled shakily. "We're spared, thank the Lord." Eliza turned back. Her hand remained on the glass, palm warm against the chill. She said nothing. Outside, the rain lessened to a steady hiss. Loco waited until the sound of wheels faded completely. Only then did he dismount. He walked to the place where the coach had stood, boots sinking into the churned mud. There, half exposed by the wagon's passage, lay the small medicine bundle his mother had once tied, now torn open, the sacred herbs scattered, one feather of red-tailed hawk crushed under an iron rim. He knelt. Fingers hovered above the broken quill. To gather it now would be to admit the violation. To leave it would be to let the land carry the wound longer. Kael rode up beside him, silent. The younger man's eyes moved from the bundle to Loco's face. "They passed," Kael said quietly. No question in it. Loco did not answer at once. He reached down, slow, and closed his hand around the crushed feather. The quill snapped again under his grip. Clean. Final. He stood, tucked the broken piece inside his shirt, against the skin. The rain washed the last of the herbs into the mud. "They passed," he said at last. "But the road remembers." Kael nodded once. He did not ask what the white woman had seen, or why the leader had let the coach go untouched. Some things were not spoken, until they had to be. Loco mounted again. The band waited, horses restless in the wet. He turned the paint toward the high country, toward the spring that still held water. For now. Behind them, the wagon road lay empty except for ruts filling slowly with rain. And somewhere in the gray distance, a single white feather drifted on the wind, caught for a moment against a wet pine branch before it fell. The land had been touched again, and the silence between the worlds had grown thinner. The trading post at the edge of Silver City smelled of old hides, tobacco smoke, and the faint iron tang of blood from the butcher's block behind the adobe wall. Dust hung in the air even after the morning wind had died, clinging to everything. Sacks of corn, the rough wool blankets stacked against the porch posts, the sweat on the necks of the mules tied to the rail. Eliza Hartwell stood near the corner of the porch, plain riding skirt brushing the dirt, hat pulled low. She had told Vesper Lang she needed thread from the trader's wife. The lie had come easily, quieter than the truth would have been. Sable Ruiz was kneading dough on a scarred plank table inside the open doorway. Flour dusted her forearms like ash. She did not look up when Eliza approached, but her hands slowed. "The man on the paint horse," Eliza said, voice low. "The one they call Loco. Do you know him?" Sable's fingers paused in the dough. She glanced once toward the plaza, empty except for a few Mexican traders unloading hides, then back to the white woman's face. "Everyone knows him," she said. "He brings deer and herbs, takes coffee, tools, never trouble." A beat. "Why?" Eliza swallowed. The pull from the mountain road had not faded. It had grown thorns inside her ribs. "I need to speak with him." Sable wiped her hands on her apron. She studied Eliza a long moment, then nodded toward the narrow trail that cut behind the post, toward the red rock rim. "He trades at the spring beyond the first bend. Alone, usually. But be careful, señorita. Some things once started don't stop." Eliza walked the trail without looking back. The sun beat down, drawing sweat along her spine. The canyon opened ahead, narrow red walls rising sharp, a thin ribbon of green where cottonwoods clung to the seep. She saw him before he saw her. Loco crouched near the trickle of water, filling a small gourd from the spring. His blanket was folded beside him, rifle propped against a boulder. He straightened when her boot scraped gravel. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the drip of water into the gourd and the faint rasp of her breathing. "You came," he said at last. The words were quiet, not surprised, not welcoming, just fact. "I had to." Eliza's voice sounded thin in her own ears. "After the road. After that look." He set the gourd down carefully. His eyes moved over her, not hungry, not soft, measuring. "You should not be here." "I know." She stepped closer anyway. The air between them thickened with the smell of wet stone and sage. "But I am." Loco did not move. He watched her the way a man watches a storm cloud building over the ridge, knowing it will bring rain or ruin or both. Somewhere behind them, a horse snorted softly, his paint tethered in the shade. From the rim above, a shadow shifted. Zinnia stood half-hidden among the junipers, shawl pulled tight, face unreadable. She did not come closer. She only watched. Loco followed Eliza's gaze, saw the old woman, and his jaw tightened a fraction. He turned back to Eliza. "My people see you now. They see the tracks your wagon left near our spring. They see me let you pass. Words are already moving." Eliza's throat closed. "I didn't mean—" "Meaning changes nothing." His voice stayed level. "The land remembers. The band remembers. A leader who looks too long at a white woman brings questions. Questions bring doubt. Doubt brings weakness when soldiers come." She lifted her hand, slow, palm up. "Then why did you look back?" He did not answer at once. His fingers flexed once at his side, then stilled. The silence stretched, heavy as wet blanket wool. Finally, he stepped forward. One measured pace. Close enough she could smell the smoke in his hair, the faint leather and sweat on his skin. He lifted his own hand, stopped just short of hers. The space between their palms felt charged, like air before lightning. "I looked because something in you answered something in me," he said, words low, reluctant. "And that is dangerous." Her fingers trembled. She closed the distance. Barely a brush, cloth against calloused skin through the thin glove. His hand flinched, instinctive, but he did not pull away at once. For the space of 3 heartbeats they stood like that, connected by the lightest touch, the canyon walls pressing in. Then he withdrew. Slow, deliberate. The glove carried the warmth of his palm for a moment longer. Zinnia turned her face away, as though the sight had burned her eyes. She walked back along the rim without a word, shawl trailing like smoke. Loco looked after her, then back to Eliza. "Go back to your ranch, to the man they chose for you." "I can't." The words came out small, honest. "Not now." He exhaled once, sharp, almost a sound of pain held in check. "Then we both carry what comes next." Above them, the junipers stirred in a sudden breath of wind. A single dry leaf drifted down, caught between them, and fell to the red earth without sound. The canyon held its breath, and somewhere far off, the faint echo of a soldier's bugle carried on the same wind. Distant, but coming closer. The cottonwoods along the seep in Red Rock Canyon stood like old sentinels, leaves silver green and trembling in the late afternoon breeze. The water ran thin over smooth red stone, clear enough to show the pebbles at the bottom, but slower than it had been even a week ago. Loco sat on a flat boulder near the bank, knees drawn up, arms resting loose across them. He had come early. The band knew he was here. They always knew when he left the camp alone. No one followed. Not yet. Eliza arrived on foot, horse tied back at the first bend. Her boots left small, distinct prints in the damp sand, prints that would dry and harden by morning. She stopped a few paces away, hat in her hands, hair loosened by the ride and clinging to the damp at her temples. The canyon walls held the heat of the day. It rose in slow waves from the stone. She sat without asking. Not close, not far. The space between them felt measured, like the distance a man keeps from a fire he is not yet sure he can control. Neither spoke at first. The water murmured over rock. A jay called once from high up, sharp and brief, then fell silent. Loco broke the quiet. "You came again." "I couldn't stay away." Her voice was low, almost lost in the canyon's echo. She looked at her hands, pale, unmarked, then at his. "I tried." He nodded once. Slow. He had tried too. Rode the high trails longer than necessary yesterday. Checked the same water holes twice, hoping the pull would fade like smoke. It had not. She drew a breath. "Tell me about your people. Not the stories everyone tells. The small things. What you remember when the night is long." He looked at the water a long time before answering. "We remember the taste of piñón smoke in winter. The way the horses know the trail home before the rider does. The sound my mother made, grinding corn. Steady, like rain on hide." He paused. "Those things keep us when the soldiers take the rest." Eliza listened without moving. The words settled into her like dust after a long ride. She thought of Philadelphia parlors, gas lamps hissing, the clink of silver on porcelain. None of it felt real anymore. "I remember my sister laughing at the piano," she said quietly, "and the way my father's study smelled of ink and leather. But it all feels distant, like someone else's life." Loco turned his head slightly. Their eyes met, held. The canyon seemed to narrow around them. Kyle had come to him at dawn, stood outside the wickiup, blanket pulled tight against the chill. The young one saw her tracks again. Small boot near the spring. A yellow thread caught on sage. They say the land feels it. They say the leader looks too long at the white woman. Kyle's voice had stayed even, but the question underneath was plain. "Are you still ours?" Loco had given no answer then, only nodded once and walked away. Now the question sat between his shoulder blades like a stone. Eliza shifted closer. "Not much. Enough." Her hand rested on the boulder between them. "I don't know what this is," she said, "but it's real, and it frightens me." He looked at her hand, then at his own. Calloused, scarred, marked by years of bowstring and rain. He lifted it slowly, stopped an inch from hers. The air between their palms felt warm, alive. She closed the distance. Fingers brushed, leather glove against rough skin. Not a grasp, just contact. Light, sustained. His breath caught once, barely audible. He did not pull away immediately. The touch lasted 3 heartbeats, 4. Long enough for the canyon to notice, long enough for the cottonwoods to witness. Then he withdrew. Slow. The glove retained the heat of his palm. His hand retained the ghost of hers. He closed his fingers into a fist, as though to hold the memory or crush it. From the shadowed juniper higher on the rim, Zinnia watched, shawl drawn tight across her shoulders. She did not move closer. She did not speak, only stood, face half in shadow, eyes steady on the two figures below. She saw the touch, saw the withdrawal, saw the way Loco's shoulders tightened afterward, the way Eliza's hand remained open on the stone, trembling just enough to notice. Zinnia turned then, walked back along the rim without hurry. Her footsteps made no sound on the dry earth, but the look she carried away was heavier than words. Loco rose. Go back before the light fails. Eliza stood too. Will you be here tomorrow? He did not answer right away. The wind moved through the cottonwoods, carrying the faint scent of piñon smoke from the distant camp. If the land allows it, he said finally. She nodded once, turned toward the trail. Her boot prints marked the sand beside his. Two sets now, side by side for a moment, then diverging. He watched her go until the red rock swallowed her. Then he knelt at the spring's edge, dipped his fingers in the water, let it run cold over his palm where her touch still lingered. The water carried no warmth away. It never did. Above, the junipers held their silence, but the canyon had felt the contact, and the land, like the people who lived on it, did not forget easily. Somewhere far down the valley, a distant rifle cracked. Once, twice. Hunters, perhaps, or soldiers practicing. The sound rolled up the walls, thin and flat, then died. Loco rose. The water dripped from his hand, darkening the stone at his feet. The silence that followed was deeper than before, and it carried a weight that had not been there yesterday. The summer heat pressed down on the band like a dry hide stretched too tight across a frame. Dust rose in thin clouds behind the ponies as they picked their way down from the high rim, packs lashed heavy with what little remained. Dried venison, cornmeal ground fine, water skins half full. Loco rode at the front, paint horse stepping careful over the loose scree. The Thunglung Thap lay below them, a narrow cut of faded green where the last Bai sun clung to life amid the junipers and sage. Water would be scarcer here, closer to the soldier trails, but the choice had not been theirs. Smoke from the burned grassland still hung on the wind 2 days after the bluecoats had torched it, claiming cattle gone missing. Tracks, they said, led back to Apache ponies. Kael rode beside him, rifle across his saddle. He had not spoken since dawn, but the set of his jaw told enough. The young warriors trailed further back, murmuring low when they thought the wind carried it away. The white woman's shadow, one had said last night by the fire. It follows us. The spring gives less water each time. Loco did not turn. He kept his eyes on the trail. The sacred spring in the old canyon had run muddy after the fire's ash settled. To speak of it now would invite more than words. He had dipped a finger in the water before they left. Cold, gritty with dust. No herbs floated clean. No reflection held steady. The camp settled by dusk in the Thunglung's fold, wickiups raised quick against the rising chill. Women unpacked the skins. Children gathered sticks for fire. Loco walked the perimeter alone, checking the narrow pass where the land opened toward the settler roads. Dust from the ranch wagons sometimes reached here on strong winds. He crouched at the edge, fingers sifting the dry soil. Prints would show if anyone followed. From the ranch 20 miles east, Eliza rode with Garrick Flint trailing silent behind. He had insisted on accompanying her to check the eastern fence, but his eyes stayed on her more than the trail. The sun baked the air, drawing sweat that stung her eyes and soaked the collar of her riding shirt. The ranch house felt farther away each time she left it now. Vesper Lang's questions sharper, her glances heavier. Garrick cleared his throat once. "You've been riding out alone too much, Miss Hartwell. This country ain't kind to wanderers." She did not reply. The pull dragged her forward, steady as a rein. They parted at the fork, Garrick toward the pasture, Eliza toward the Thung Lung's rim. She tied her mare in the shade of a twisted piñon and walked the last stretch, boots sinking into the loose earth. The smell of wood smoke reached her first, faint and acrid, mixed with the dry bite of sage. Loco waited at the Ria, half shadowed by a boulder. He did not rise when she approached, only shifted enough to make space on the flat rock beside him. She sat. The silence between them stretched, broken only by the distant nicker of a pony and the faint rustle of wind through the junipers. He handed her a water skin without word. The leather was warm from the sun, the water inside tepid and tasting of earth. She drank, passed it back. Their fingers brushed, brief, unavoidable. He set it down carefully. "The band moved," he said at last. She nodded. She had seen the smoke shift on the horizon yesterday. "Why?" "Fire took the high grass. Soldiers blamed us for cattle. No proof. Doesn't matter." His voice stayed flat. He did not look at her. She watched his hands, still, but knuckles white where they rested on his knee. Below, in the Thung Lung, figures moved slow, women carrying water skins farther than before, children trailing with empty gourds. One boy, small, dark-haired, stumbled under the weight, righted himself without cry. Kyle appeared at the camp's edge, speaking low to two young men. They glanced up toward the rim, faces tight. One shook his head, walked away. Kyle looked up once, straight at Loco, then turned back to the fire. Eliza felt the weight settle deeper. "They know I'm here." Loco exhaled, slow. "Tracks don't lie. The spring runs low. They say the land feels the change." She placed a hand on her stomach, instinctive, though nothing showed yet. The thought had come 2 nights ago, quiet and certain. "I didn't mean to bring this." He looked at her then, eyes dark, unreadable. "Meaning doesn't fill the water skins." When the wind picked up, carrying the faint, metallic scent of distant rain that would not reach them. Eliza watched as a woman, old, shawl-frayed, walked the long path to the seep, gourd balanced on her shoulder. The children waited by the fire, faces pinched. Loco rose, walked to the edge. He knelt, dug a small trench in the dry soil with his knife. Shallow, deliberate, redirecting what little runoff might come, not for show, just necessary. She stood beside him. "Let me come closer. Help." He stopped digging. The knife blade glinted dull in the fading light. "Closer brings more eyes, more words. The band needs water, not questions." "But if I stay away," she cut off. The ranch waited. Thane Whitaker's letters stacking in Bram's study, Vesper's watchful gaze, Garrick's quiet suspicion growing each time she rode out. Loco sheathed the knife. Stood. His hand hovered near hers, close, not touching. "The land decides what it gives." She reached. Fingers brushed his wrist, bare skin this time. He stiffened, but did not pull away. The contact lasted longer than before. Warmth spread, slow as honey in winter. From the junipers above, Zinnia watched again. She stepped forward once, silent, then stopped. In her hand, a small pouch of dried herbs, tied with sinew. She walked down the slope, slow, placed it at Eliza's feet without word. Eliza reached for it. Zinnia's hand withdrew, quick, instinctive, as though the touch carried ash. The old woman turned back to the camp. Her footsteps faded into the dust. Loco looked at the pouch, then at Eliza. His jaw tightened once more. The wind died. The Thung Lung held its breath, and in the distance a thin column of smoke rose from another burned patch. Soldiers' work, or the land's own warning. The seep, in the narrow Hem Nui, had shrunk to a muddy pool, ringed by cracked clay and brittle reeds. The water lay still, dark under the midday sun, no longer reflecting the canyon walls clearly. Only a blurred shadow of what had been. Loco stood at the edge, fingers trailing the surface once. The liquid clung cold to his skin, gritty with ash from the distant burns. He had come alone at first, but the band knew. They always knew when the spring called for checking. Eliza arrived on foot, skirt hem heavy with dust from the long walk. She had left the ranch before dawn. Vesper Lang's questions hanging like smoke in the parlor air, her eyes sharp as knife edges. "Where do you go, Miss Hartwell? Mr. Whitaker's letters pile up unanswered." Eliza had said nothing, only saddled the mare and ridden out while the stars still burned cold overhead. Now she stopped at the pool's rim, opposite Loco. No words, just the faint rasp of her breathing, the sweat beading at her collar mixing with the dry scent of sage. He looked up, nodded once. She stepped closer, no longer the careful distance of before. The canyon pressed in, walls red and silent, trapping the heat like breath held too long. They sat on the flat stones near the reeds. The air thickened with the smell of damp earth and the faint, acrid bite of old fire smoke carried on the wind. Loco's hand rested on his knee, still as carved wood. Eliza's fingers trembled once, then stilled as she placed them near his. Kyle had come to him last night, standing outside the wickiup with blanket folded over his arm. "The young ones demand a gathering. They say the white woman's shadow taints the spring. Water runs low. They want cleansing." Loco had listened without moving, the weight of the words settling like dust on hide. No answer given. Only the slow nod that meant he had heard. Now the band gathered at the Hem Nui's mouth, shadows against the rim, rifles loose in hands, faces turned toward the pool. Kyle stood among them, silent. No one spoke. They waited. Eliza shifted. Her hand brushed Loco's. Skin to skin this time. He did not withdraw at once. The touch lingered, warmth spreading slow through the dry air. She leaned closer. Her breath against his neck carried the faint sweetness of ranch soap, foreign as the ash in the water. He closed his eyes a moment. The pull deepened, pulling like a current under the pool's still surface. He lifted his hand, slow, deliberate, traced the line of her jaw. She did not pull away. The canyon held its breath. They moved together then, quiet, necessary. No haste, no words. His blanket spread on the stones, rough wool against skin. The reeds bent under the wind, whispering faint as moccasins on sand. Sweat mingled with the earthy dampness rising from the pool. Her fingers dug into his shoulder once, hard, holding on. He held back the sound in his throat, buried it deep. When it ended, they lay still. The sun slanted lower, casting long shadows across the water. The pool's surface rippled once, faint, unbidden, as though the land had felt the shift. From the rim, the band stirred. Low murmurs carried on the wind, like dry leaves scraping stone. Kael stepped forward once, then stopped. His face tightened. Eliza rose first, adjusted her skirt with hands that shook just enough to notice. She placed one palm on her stomach. Instinctive, unknowing yet. Loco watched her, stood, pulled the blanket around her shoulders without touch. "The band sees," he said quietly. She looked toward the rim. The figures there did not move closer, but their eyes held. "I won't go back." He nodded once. Slow. The choice hung between them, heavy as the rifle across Kael's back. Vesper's letter would reach Bram Hartwell by now. Words scratched on paper, ink smelling of accusation. "Your daughter rides out alone, too often. The territory whispers." The ranch life, fences, cattle, Thane Whitaker's steady gaze, closed off like a door latched shut. Loco turned toward the band, walked to the rim. Eliza followed, steps deliberate, hand still on her middle. The warriors parted slightly as they approached. No welcome, only space. Kael met Loco's eyes. They call for talk, cleansing. The spring runs dry because of this. Loco stood before them, did not speak at once. The wind picked up, carrying the faint crack of distant gunfire, soldiers drilling or hunting what moved in the brush. The band shifted. A young warrior, face scarred from an old cougar scratch, stepped back, rifle grip tightening. Eliza stopped beside Loco. Hand dropped to her side, then lifted again, to her stomach. The gesture plain, unspoken. The murmurs died. The band fell silent, heavy, unbroken. No one moved to touch her. No one spoke the taboo aloud. Zinnia stood at the back, shawl pulled tight. She watched without blink, saw the hand on the belly, saw Loco's stance shift, protective, unyielding, saw the pool below, surface now still as death, no ripple left. She turned her gaze away, stepped back into the shadow of the junipers. The memory settled in her like ash in water, deep, unremovable. The canyon wind died, the silence deepened, and the land, tasting the change in the air, remembered it all. The cabin stood low against the Thung Lung's eastern wall, adobe walls patched with wickiup brush, roof of cedar poles and hides still smelling of fresh pitch. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of piñon smoke and the faint metallic tang of blood from the birthing cloths Eliza had washed earlier. She sat on the low platform of furs, back braced against the wall, one hand resting heavy on the swell of her belly. The child moved slow now, a dull pressure, more than a kick. Tired, like everything else in this dry season. Outside, the fire burned low in the center of the camp. Warriors sat in a loose circle, blankets drawn tight against the night chill. Women stood farther back, children hushed at their skirts. Loco stood in the middle, arms loose at his sides, face lit red by the coals. No one spoke yet. The silence held like a taut bowstring. Kael had brought the word at dusk. Soldiers camped 3 ridges west, fires visible after dark. They say a settler woman vanished. Tracks lead this way. No proof. No need. The band felt the noose tightening. One of the older men, scarred across the cheek from a long-ago fight, shifted. His voice came low, careful not to break the taboo outright. The one who used to lead before this one, he would have known the spring would run dry if the line was crossed. Now the water barely seeps. The child inside her carries what should not be carried. Murmurs rose, soft like wind through dry grass. A young warrior nodded once. Another looked away, jaw tight. Eliza heard it through the open door flap. She did not rise. Her hand pressed firmer against her belly, as though to shield what grew there. The name she had not spoken, Talon, hung unspoken in the air. Loco had never said it aloud since the day the soldiers took him. To name the dead was to call their spirit back unfinished. She felt the weight of it anyway, like a stone in her chest. Loco did not flinch. He turned slow, eyes moving over each face. The spring runs low because the land is tired. Soldiers burn grass. Wagons cut trails. We move when we must. The child is mine, hers, ours. The scarred man exhaled through his nose. Yours. But the blood mixes. The old ways say a line broken cannot be mended by words. The child will not carry the name properly. The spirits will not know him. And a woman near the fire made a small sound, half breath, half sigh. Children shifted closer to their mothers. Loco's hand flexed once at his side. He stepped forward, half a pace. I swore to protect what is here. The land. The people. What grows. His voice stayed even. No rise. No plea. If the child carries my blood, and hers, it carries what the land has given. I will not turn from it. The scarred man looked down at the coals. Another warrior, younger, rose halfway, then sat again. The circle held. No one moved to challenge him directly, but the space around Loco widened, subtle, like water pulling back from a stone. Kael stood silent near the edge. His eyes met Loco's for a moment, long enough to carry the question he had asked before. Then he looked away. Eliza rose inside the cabin. Slow. The furs rustled under her. She stepped to the doorway, blanket wrapped loose around her shoulders. The firelight caught the curve of her belly, plain now under the thin cloth. She did not speak. Only stood there, hand still on the swell, eyes on Loco's back. The band saw her. The murmurs died. A child whimpered once. His mother hushed him quick. Loco turned, saw her framed in the low opening. He walked to her, slow, deliberate, stopped just outside the threshold. Go back inside. Rest. She shook her head once. Not alone. He looked at her a long moment, then stepped aside. She walked out, barefoot on the cooling earth, stopped beside him in the firelight. The band watched. No one rose. No one spoke. The scarred man exhaled again. The child comes. The water still shrinks. We move soon, or we lose more. Loco nodded once. We move, but she stays. The child stays. A low sound moved through the circle. Not anger, not agreement. Just acknowledgement. Heavy, unsettled. Zinnia sat farthest from the fire, shawl pulled over her head. She had not spoken all night. Now she rose, slow, joints stiff, walked to Loco without hurry. In her hand, a single feather. Long, dark at the base, tipped with white. She held it out. Loco took it. The quill felt cool against his palm, old, worn smooth by years of handling. Zinnia looked at him, then at Eliza. then at the hand on the belly. She said nothing, only turned and walked back to her place by the fire. Saturday. Pulled the shawl tighter. The feather rested in Loco's hand. He closed his fingers around it, gentle, careful. The fire popped once, sending a spark upward into the dark. The band remained seated. The silence stretched. Longer than before, deeper. No one moved to leave. No one moved to stay. Outside the circle, the wind stirred the dry grass. Somewhere far off, a coyote yipped, short, sharp, then fell quiet. The feather in Loco's hand felt heavier than it should, and the land, tasting the night air, waited for what would come when the child drew breath. The bow cat howled through the thung lung like a pack of spirits denied rest, whipping dust against the cabin's adobe walls until the air tasted of grit and iron. Inside, the single oil lamp flickered low, casting shadows that danced across the fur-strewn floor. Eliza lay on the platform, sweat-soaked blanket twisted beneath her, breath coming in shallow gasps that filled the small space with the raw scent of effort and blood. The pains had started at dusk, slow at first, then building like the storm outside, each wave pulling deeper, unrelenting. Zinnia knelt beside her, hands steady on the damp cloths, wiping Eliza's brow with water drawn from the last gourd. Two other women, silent, faces lined with the same quiet endurance, held the corners of the blanket taut. No words passed between them, only the low hum of a chant, barely audible over the wind, old rhythms to call the child forth, to ease what the land allowed. Outside, Loco stood at the cabin's door, back to the flap, blanket pulled tight across his shoulders. Sand stung his face, caught in his hair, ground between his teeth. The band gathered a stone's throw away, huddled in the lee of the wickiups, fire banked low against the gale. Their faces turned toward the cabin, eyes reflecting the faint glow from the door. No one spoke. The storm did the talking, rattling the poles, scattering embers like warnings. Kyle approached through the swirling dust, rifle slung over his shoulder. He stopped short of Loco, voice low. Soldiers' fires burn closer. 2 ridges now, horses heard in the dark. If the child comes, we move at dawn, or they find us here. Loco did not turn. He nodded once, slow, deliberate. The feather from Zinnia lay tucked inside his shirt, quill pressing against his skin like a thorn. He felt its weight with each breath. From the group, murmurs rose, faint, cut by the wind. The scarred man stood among them, arms crossed. The old ways say cleanse before the blood mixes fully. The spring barely gives now. The child will drain what's left. A younger warrior shifted, knife at his belt glinting dull. Another looked away, jaw working silent. Inside, Eliza arched once, breath hissing through clenched teeth. The pain clawed deep, pulling memories with it. Philadelphia rain on polished windows, her sister's laughter muffled through a door, all distant now, faded as the water in the seep. Zinnia pressed a hand to her belly, firm, guiding. The chant deepened, words in the old tongue weaving with the storm's howl. Loco's hand flexed at his side. The band waited, their eyes on him now, heavier than the sand. Kyle leaned closer. They push for the right, before the cry comes, to save the water, the trails. Loco looked at him then, eyes steady. The child is here. It comes as it will. Kyle's face tightened. You choose her, over the band. Loco did not answer. He turned back to the door. The flap stirred, faint, like a breath released. He stepped forward, one pace, hand hovering near the edge. The scarred man rose from the circle. If the line breaks, the spirits turn away. The one who led before knew that. We lose the name, the water, everything. A low sound moved through the group. Not agreement, not refusal, just the weight of what had been said, hanging in the dust-choked air. Eliza cried out once, sharp, cut short. Sweat ran cold down her back, soaking the furs. The child pressed lower, insistent. Zinnia's hands moved quicker now, cloths damp with blood, the metallic scent sharp in the close space. The women exchanged a glance, silent, knowing. One reached for the sinew-tied pouch of herbs, scattered a pinch into the lamp's flame. Smoke rose thin, acrid, mingling with the storm's grit seeping under the door. Loco pushed the flap aside. Stepped in. No words. Only the shared heat, the pulse. No words. Only the shared heat, the pulse under skin. The scarred man stepped forward outside. He chooses, but the right waits. The child cannot stay if the land refuses. Kael held up a hand. Slow. The group shifted. A few, younger ones, turned away, blankets pulled tight. Walking toward the ponies, not leaving yet. But the space widened. Eliza's breath came ragged. The pain crested, tore through her like wind through reeds. She arched again, grip tightening on Loco's hand until his knuckles whitened. Blood scent thickened. The lamp sputtered once, smoke curling. Outside, the bow eased a fraction, sand settling slow. The scarred man sat again. The others waited. Hooves sounded faint in the dark, soldiers' patrols or just the wind playing tricks. Zinnia worked steady. The chant faded. Then a new sound. Wet. Sharp. A cry breaking the night. Thin and insistent. Rivencole drew his first breath. Small body slick and red in the lamp's glow. Zinnia wrapped him in clean hide, held him a moment, eyes on the child, then on Loco. She stepped forward, placed the bundle in his arms. The weight settled, warm, fragile. Loco looked down. The boy's eyes opened once, dark, unfocused. Zinnia stepped back. Her face held no expression, only the deep lines around her eyes, recording what the storm had brought. The cry carried outside. The band stirred. Low sounds. Not joy, not rejection. The scarred man looked away. Kael stood still. The wind picked up again, scattering embers from the fire. Dust swirled low, coating everything. Zinnia turned her gaze to the door. The right had not come. The land had heard the cry, and now it held the memory, deep as roots in dry earth. Winter settled over the high Thung lung like a thin, worn blanket, cold enough to crack the earth, dry enough to leave the grass brittle underfoot. The band had moved twice since the birth, climbing higher each time, away from the smoke of soldier fires and the reservation lines creeping closer like roots seeking water. The new ground held little. Sparse piñon, a seep that ran clear but weak, patches of winter grass barely enough for the ponies. The cabin stood smaller now, walls patched with fresh hides, roof weighted with stones against the wind. Smoke rose thin from the hole above, carrying the faint scent of burning cedar and the sharper bite of sage tea. Eliza sat inside on the low platform. riven coal cradled against her chest. The boy was quiet tonight, dark eyes open, watching the firelight play across the adobe. His small hand clutched the edge of her blanket, fingers strong already, but the weight of him still felt fragile. Her back ached deep, a dull fire that never quite cooled since the labor. She shifted once, slow, breath catching as the pain flared along her spine. It would not leave. The women had said as much, quiet, matter of fact, when they changed the last of the birthing cloths. Some things the body kept. Loco stood outside the doorway, blanket draped loose over his shoulders. He faced the lower valley, where the old ground lay now, distant ridges marked by faint columns of smoke from the new soldier post. The reservation fence ran straight across what had been their summer pasture. Wire glinted cold in the moonlight when the wind cleared the dust. A few ponies grazed sparse near the cabin, heads low, ribs showing sharper than before. The band had shrunk, 3 families gone in the last moon, riding south without farewell. No anger spoken, only the quiet acknowledgement that the land no longer fed them all. He stepped back inside. The door flap fell behind him, muffling the wind's low moan. Eliza looked up. Their eyes met. Long, steady. No need for words tonight. She adjusted Riven in her arms. The boy stirred once, then settled. The twins, Sable and Elowen, slept in the corner on a nest of furs. Born smaller, quicker, in the lean weeks after Riven. Eliza had carried them heavy, the labor shorter but no less tearing. Her body remembered both. Each scar, each stretch of muscle that never quite returned. She moved slower now, breath shorter on the uphill trails. The women helped without comment, passing gourds, grinding corn. No pity, only necessity. Loco knelt beside her. His hand rested near Riven's head. Close, not touching. The feather Zinnia had given still lay tucked in his pouch, quill worn smooth from years of carrying. He had never spoken the old name aloud. The taboo held firm, but the boy's eyes sometimes caught the light the same way. Dark. Searching. Loco felt it each time, a quiet ache under the ribs. Outside, the wind carried voices, low, fragmented. Kael's among them, speaking to the remaining warriors. The post grows, wire stretches farther. We stay here, or we ride where the land still gives. No answer rose clear. Only the shuffle of feet, the crack of dry wood on the fire. Eliza shifted again. Pain lanced up her back, sharp, familiar. She pressed her lips together, breathed slow through her nose. Loco's hand moved then, rested light on her shoulder. No pressure, just presence. The boy grows strong, she said quietly. Not a question. Loco nodded once. He does. She looked toward the door. They leave because of us. He did not deny it. Some leave, some stay. The land decides who it keeps. Riven stirred, small fist opening against her chest. Eliza covered his hand with hers, the gesture simple, protective. Loco watched. The fire popped once, sending a spark upward. It died before reaching the roof hole. Kael appeared at the flap, blanket dusted with frost. The scouts say the wire moves again. Tomorrow, maybe. We lose the last good grass if we wait. Loco rose, stepped to the doorway, looked out at the dark valley below, where the old trails lay empty now, marked only by wire and dust. He could ride down, face the soldiers, demand what had been taken, lose his life in the attempt, or stay. Move again. Keep breathing. Keep the boy breathing. Keep Eliza breathing. He turned back. Eliza met his gaze. No plea in her eyes, only the same quiet weight he carried. Kael waited. Loco spoke low. We move at first light, higher, where the seep still runs. Kael nodded once, turned away. His footsteps faded into the wind. Eliza exhaled slow. Riven settled deeper against her. The twins slept on, small breaths even in the cold. Zinnia sat alone by the outer fire, shawl pulled tight. She had not entered the cabin tonight. Now she rose, slow, walked to the edge of the light. Riven stirred at the sound. She knelt near the doorway, face half-shadowed, looked at the boy, then at Loco. She reached into her pouch, drew a small bundle, dried sage, tied with sinew, held it out. Loco took it without word. Zinnia's eyes moved to Riven. She leaned closer, voice a whisper, barely carrying over the wind. She began a story, old words, soft, careful not to name what should not be named. The tale of the first horse, the first fire, the way the land gave when it chose. Riven watched her, eyes wide in the firelight. Halfway through, she stopped. The words hung unfinished. She looked at the boy again, long, searching. Then rose, turned back to the fire, sat. The story ended there, broken by the silence that followed. The wind picked up outside, carrying the faint metallic creak of distant wire stretching taut. The cabin held its heat a moment longer, but the night deepened, and the land below, once theirs, lay quiet under frost and fence. And the story Zinnia had begun would not finish the same way again. The late afternoon sun hung low over the high Thung Lung, copper red and heavy, bleeding light across the dry grass and the scattered juniper. 5 years had passed since the mountain road, since the rain and the first locked gaze through wagon glass. The cabin stood weathered now, adobe cracked in places, roof poles darkened by seasons of smoke and frost. The seep nearby ran thinner than memory allowed, a slow trickle over stone that barely wet the pebbles at its edge. Eliza sat on the low bench outside the door, twins curled against her, Sable's head on one shoulder, Elowin's on the other. Their small breaths rose and fell in rhythm, warm against her neck. Riven Cole played nearby, pushing a stick through the dust, tracing lines that vanished as soon as he made them. He was taller now, dark hair falling over his eyes the way his father's did, but the quiet gravity in his movements carried something older, something borrowed from both sides of the blood that ran in him. Loco sat beside Eliza, blanket loose across his shoulders. His hand rested on the bench between them, not touching, close enough to feel the warmth. The feather, long, dark-tipped, lay on his knee, quill worn smooth from years of carrying. He had not spoken the old name in all that time. The taboo held, but the boy sometimes looked at it the same way he looked at the distant ridges, searching, silent. The wind moved low through the grass, carrying the faint metallic creak of wire from far below. Soldier posts still there, reservation lines pushed closer each season. The band had shrunk to a handful of wiki-ups now. The rest had drifted south or east, following what little the land still gave. No farewells spoken. No anger. Just the slow acknowledgement that the ground could not hold them all anymore. Eliza shifted once. Her back twinged. Old pain, never gone, a reminder carried in bone. She had not heard from Bram or Leora in years. The last letter, creased, ink faded, had come unanswered. She kept it folded in the small pouch with the twins' first locks of hair. No regret in the silence, only the weight of what had been left behind. Loco's gaze stayed on the valley below. Smoke rose thin from the distant post, steady, patient. He exhaled slow, breath visible in the cooling air. Riven wandered closer, stopped at Loco's knee, looked up, eyes dark, steady. Loco reached down, lifted the boy onto the bench between them. Riven settled against his side, small hand resting on the blanket. Loco picked up the feather, held it a moment, quill cool against his palm. Then he placed it in Riven's open hand. The boy closed his fingers around it, careful, instinctive. No words passed. The feather caught the last slant of sun, tipping white against the dark. Zinnia sat farther out, near the dying fire pit, shawl drawn tight. She had watched them all afternoon, silent, face half in shadow. Now she rose, slow, joints stiff from the cold. Walked toward the cabin without hurry, stopped a few paces away. Looked at the boy, at the feather in his hand, at Loco and Eliza, side by side. She said nothing, only turned, walked into the lengthening shadow of the junipers. Her footsteps faded, soft on the dry earth, until the wind swallowed them. The sun slipped behind the rim. The thung lung darkened slow, colors bleeding to gray and blue. Riven turned the feather once in his fingers, then held it still. The twins stirred in their sleep, small breaths warm against Eliza's skin. Loco's hand moved then, rested light on Eliza's. Skin to skin, no grip, just contact. She turned her palm up. Their fingers laced, slow, deliberate. The touch carried the years. Rain on the road, dust in the canyon, blood on the firs, silence after cries. The wind rose again, low, steady, moving through the grass, stirring dust around the cabin. Somewhere far below, a horse nickered. Soldier patrol, or just the echo of what had been taken. The sound rolled up the walls, thin and flat, then died. They sat without moving. The valley darkened, stars pricked cold overhead. The seep trickled faint in the distance, barely a whisper now. The land remembered everything, the wagon tracks, the broken spring, the child born in storm, the families that left, the feather passed hand to hand. It held the weight without forgiveness or blame. They stayed. No victory spoken, no peace declared, only the quiet of two people who had chosen what remained, and the child between them holding the last light of day in a single feather. The wind carried on, and the silence deepened. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share. Leave your thoughts in the comments and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal/disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice, imagery, and drafting as part of our creative process, but every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.